At first glance, The Witcher 3's quest, A Towerful of Mice, seems to be a simple story about love conquering hate. Or maybe it was just a quest he quickly blew through to get to the sex scene with Keira. Let's take a critical look at this quest's plotline. We'll see that, despite the quest's objectives mostly revolving around Annabelle, the true driver of the plot is not any single person, but rather a simple desire, greed. Much more than serving as just another side quest, this story explores the consequences of giving in to greed and the possibility of redemption from that disastrous fault. Before delving deeper into the plot, let's quickly recap the quest objectives, choices, and outcomes at a basic level. And a quick warning that this video will contain spoilers for the rest of the quests in this chain. The quest begins when Keira asks Geralt to lift a curse on Fyke Isle. She mentions that peasants speak of wraiths on the island and say that none that go there ever return. Vserad, the former lord of Crow's Perch, fled with his family to the tower on Fyke Isle to avoid the Nilfgaardian invasion. The island has been cursed ever since an incident where the inhabitants of that tower were killed. Geralt reaches the island, finding monsters, ghosts, and a tower full of rats. As he reaches the top of the tower, Keira tells him to look for the lab belonging to Alexander, the mage that once lived on that island. Once in the lab, Annabelle, the daughter of Vserad, reveals herself as a wraith and tells Geralt her story. She mentions that she was in love with a fisherman named Graham, and that she was given a potion by Alexander that she should take if ever the tower were overrun. After pillagers seize the tower, they proceed to try and rape Annabelle. She drinks the potion, which turned out to be a strong sleeping potion. She awakened sometime later, but was still under the paralytic effects of that potion. Rats were eating her. She could feel them inside of her, but she could not react. Geralt is given a choice as to whether to take her remains to Graham or not. Either option results in Graham's death, but Annabelle's fate is greatly impacted by the choice. Taking the bones to Graham results in Annabelle revealing herself as a Pesta, now free to leave the island and spread misery far and wide. Refusing the request causes Annabelle to immediately reveal herself as a Pesta and attack Geralt. After the fight, Geralt can bring Graham to the island in order to lift the curse. He embraces Annabelle, freeing her from her curse and joining her in the afterlife. Now, let's explore character motivations and the impact greed has on them and those surrounding them more closely. Although Keira asks Geralt to lift the curse as a favor to help the peasants, she drops several hints during and after this quest that reveal she is in fact a manipulator who is putting Geralt in danger simply to enrich herself. Geralt eventually discovers that her goal all along was to take Alexander's research notes in hopes of being able to gain King Radovid's favor and be accepted into his court. In the quest immediately following this one, Keira once again puts Geralt in danger to collect food for her to set up a dinner, where she plans further manipulation. The dinner serves two purposes for Keira: to confirm that the lab was not destroyed, and to get Geralt to drop his defenses so that she could ensure he would not interfere with her plan. During that dinner, she mentions that her finances are about to improve. Is it a coincidence that her finances are about to improve now that the tower on Fyke Isle is accessible to her? She makes the claim that she hopes Geralt burnt everything in the lab. The cages, the corpses, the papers. But this is a lie. Her switching the topic back to the dinner immediately upon confirming the lab was not destroyed is just another hint that she's been manipulating him all along. Finally, she casts a spell on Geralt, making him fall asleep while she sneaks away. Geralt had served his purpose in clearing the curse without destroying the lab. She no longer had a use for him. Once confronted by Geralt, Keira reveals her plan. She complains of bedbugs and says that the former advisor to King Foltest should not have to live in such conditions. She claims that she will present the possibility of creating a vaccine with the research notes to Radovid. Her interest in the research notes does not stem from a desire to cure the plague, rather from a desire for comfort and material wealth. The notes reveal Alexandra believed it would have been possible to create a vaccine for the plague, or to instead focus on weaponizing it. If Keira is allowed to go forward as she wishes, she will choose to present Radovid with a plan to weaponize the plague rather than to cure it. Her reward is to be impaled. Her choice to present a weapon rather than a cure is the greatest evidence of her desperate greed. Had she learned to be grateful for the safety that village life provided, she would perhaps have taken a more prudent approach and avoided such a gruesome death. Next, let's focus on the pillagers that raided the island. The peasants in the nearby town claimed that the island was raided for food, but the ghosts seen with Keira's magic lamp reveal otherwise. The peasants that raided the island were not really interested in food, but simply wanted to pillage the tower for its wealth. This is evidenced by the fact that the raiders decided to go on a murder and raping spree after gaining entry to the tower, rather than using only the force necessary to take the food supply. In fact, the food supply was hardly touched. While exploring the tower, fish, bread, and apples can be found untouched. Much of this food can be found in plentiful quantities in the very first room of the tower. All of this food was left to rot. The pillagers' greed ultimately led to the release of plague-infested rats, causing some of the pillagers to succumb to the plague as they sought to flee the island. Considering they took none of the food, one can assume the village was well supplied throughout the war. Their desire for the tower's riches would result in a widespread plague epidemic that would ultimately lead to the downfall of the city of Karak. Next, let's focus on Vserad, the lord who previously resided in Crow's Perch, but who chose to abandon his keep and his people in favor of the greater perceived protection of Fyke Isle. Not much of this character is revealed compared to the others, but the journal entries for this quest reveal that Vserad wallowed in excess and cared not a whit for his suffering vassals. In the same fashion as most other nobles of Velen during the Nilfgaardian invasion, Vserad packed up his wealth and fled with it where he thought he may be safe. Known as an uncaring leader, his choosing to protect his wealth rather than his people led to the demise of his entire family. Now, let's focus on Alexander, the tower's mage, who serves to show that greed can manifest itself in many forms. Alexander is a mage that lives on Fyke Isle prior to Vserad coming for shelter. He does not care for money. His greed manifests itself via his obsession with his studies. He is obsessed with his studies and nothing else, displaying an inability to show even basic levels of compassion or even any interest towards anyone else. His journals show that he could not even understand why his test subjects would complain to him, despite his knowing he had infected them with an illness that would prove fatal in more than 90% of cases. Geralt also comes across a letter from Keira, in which she clearly offers sex in exchange for access to his research. However, Alexander's notes show that he makes efforts to limit his contact with her. Not even a beautiful woman throwing herself at him could get him interested in anything besides his research. One case where it seems Alexander may have actually shown compassion towards someone else was when he gave Annabelle the sleeping potion. However, I do wonder if this potion, more so than the rats, is the cause of the plague spreading to the peasants so quickly. His notes mention that plague victims do not show symptoms immediately. However, the ghosts of the pillagers that were fleeing the island reveal that they began showing symptoms before they even had a chance to leave the island. Did the potion contain a concentrated dose of the plague, so powerful that those affected by it would show symptoms immediately? If so, this can hardly be called compassion. Alexander is so obsessed with his research that he is willing to inflict horrible harm on others just to further his own goals. His greed does not take the form of a lust for material wealth, rather a lust for knowledge. Finally, let's look at Annabelle, another character whose greed manifests itself as a desire for something besides wealth, but who also shows that greed can be overcome. Annabelle is believed to have become a pesta due to the strong emotions at play during her death. She was paralyzed by the sleeping potion, as rats ate her alive. She was afraid. She was angry that Graham was not there for her. Prior to her death, Annabelle is presented as one of the few innocent characters in the story. Alexander's journal mentions how sheltered she was, including Vserad's request that she not be allowed to see anyone infected by the plague due to the effect this would have on her. Geralt witnesses a scene of Vserad's ghost complaining to Annabelle that he does not want to hear about the peasants from her anymore. This implies that she cared enough about the peasants to regularly ask her father to be a kinder ruler. In death, of the various types of wraiths in the Witcher universe, she becomes a pesta, a specific type of wraith that craves human suffering. The only innocent character in the story is converted into a monster whose greed manifests itself in the form of the need to relish on others' suffering. As is the case with Alexander, greed does not always manifest itself as a desire for wealth. However, there is hope for Annabelle. She also serves to show that greed can be overcome. If Geralt chooses to bring Graham back to the island, Graham's love for her is strong enough to free her from this curse. This seemingly straightforward quest starts as just another job for the Witcher, no different than any contract. But paying close attention to the details reveals a far deeper story, with each character chasing their own ambition, but ultimately succumbing to the consequences of their greed. This questline provides Geralt with an important lesson on the dangers of greed, a lesson that may prove critical for future decisions. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Let me know if you agree with my analysis in the comments section, or share your own.